Testing just a moment. Can you hear me back in the back? Okay? Thank you. Well, Chris, thanks for that introduction. It's certainly a pleasure to be here this morning. I really appreciate the Forage team asking me to be part of this program today. And I've been on the program with Jim Garish before, and I really enjoy his presentation. I listen through it again. I learn a little something extra every time because he is truly an expert, and he believes everything he told you this morning. I know he does that because he practices that, and he practices that with many hundreds of producers around the world. It is a pleasure for me to be here this morning to talk to you a little bit about selecting cattle for optimal profitability in pasture settings, and there certainly are differences, particularly for our environment in Kentucky. I'll show you 2 or 3 quick slides just to show you that I am a little bit involved in pasture management. I have 6 farms on which I do all the rotational grazing and put out the mineral, that kind of thing. And this may be a bad word to talk about, but this is Johnson grass, and those are mature cows in that Johnson grass pasture. And I heard Dr. Gary say yesterday that for some ranches he recommends grazing between hip and knee, and I'll let this get a little bit beyond because in the particular time of the year that Johnson grass grows really well. And so those are mature cows in that Johnson grass, and that's a sorghum Sudan pasture there. We do use quite a lot of that in the summertime. We particularly use that for grazing our fall bulls. We develop our fall bulls on pasture, and we use something like that. This is a typical cool season setting, and you can see quite a few cows in this photograph. I had just moved that entire herd. In our operation, we have a lot of paddocks, and I said this is a typical paddock. On those 6 farms that I do, I range from 2 paddocks. I'd like to have more, but 2 paddocks up to 16 paddocks. No 2 paddocks are the same size. Sometimes I hear farmers be concerned about doing rotational grazing because they tend to think all those paddocks need to be similar. The management is handling those paddocks that are different in size and shape and that kind of thing. So all of our paddocks are of different size and shape. It's a matter of just managing. And we don't do it quite as intensively as Jim talked about doing, but we do have some of those we have to move daily because they're small enough. But then some of those will be like 3-day common movement in the summertime. I touched the wrong button there. Now, if there's one thing important that I'm going to tell you today, it's the very first thing I tell you here. And keep this in mind, and Jim will talk about this probably again this afternoon. Environmental and forage adaptability trump every other criterion that we may be using in beef cattle selection. Now, I'm an animal breeder, geneticist, whatever you want to call me, and I believe strongly in genetic evaluation and the use of EPDs and selection, economic selection indexes. I believe strongly in using all those, but I'll guarantee you that none of those are near as important as selecting cattle that are environmentally and forage adaptable to your region. And we're a very unique region of the country. You may not know it, but many of you probably do. We are actually in the toughest region of the country. Cattle that can thrive in a Kentucky 31 fescue environment can really thrive in the sand hills of Nebraska or wherever they may go. So cattle that can adapt to this part of the country are very adaptable in other parts of the country. Now, selection for environmental and forage adaptability, when I say that, I'm really talking a lot about Kentucky 31 fescue adaptability because I guarantee you that 95% of the farms, people in this room, 95% of the farmers in Kentucky still have Kentucky 31. So if cattle are not adaptable to Kentucky 31, they're not adaptable to our environment and our forage. Now, very important, almost all the fescue research has overlooked the fact that major differences in fescue adaptability exist among animals. They are different. And importantly, these differences in adaptability of fescue to be heritable. These differences in adaptability are heritable, so if they're heritable, we can change them by selection. Now, how do we do that? I think it's pretty simple. Selection for hair shedding in this area of the country, which we call the fescue belt, the key indicator of adaptability is hair shedding in the spring. Dr. Jared Decker at the University of Missouri is doing a major project on environmental adaptability. He has a USDA grant to study environmental adaptability. We have 450 cows on Dr. Decker's project. We hair score all those cows the first week of May every year and give them a body condition score. He has 8,000 cows in that project, and his project, he shows that the heritability for hair shedding is about 35%. And Dr. Joe Cassidy, who's now department head in animal science at South Dakota State, was earlier at North Carolina State, and he did a major project for the American Angus Association. They found the heritability at 35%. American Angus Association got records to show that the heritability of hair shedding is somewhere around 35% to 40%. Now, to put that in perspective, that's the same rate of heritability as growth rate in cattle. And you know how much progress we've made in growth rate, so we should expect the same rate of improvement for hair shedding as we have made for growth rate. So we can change this hair shedding component for cattle. And there's a difference. You can sure tell the difference these two cows, can't you? These two cows are contemporaries, grazing in the same pasture here in Kentucky. August the 28th this year. This is what we want. Want it slick as a mole, shedded all the hair, and need to do that by the last of April. In August, this cow still has all that hair on her. Now, what my son says, and I think it's a really good statement, he says, those cows with that extra hair that don't shed regularly, they may get pregnant this year, and they may do it 2 years, may do it 2. But he says they're going to be open sometime much faster than those cows that shed, and that's exactly right. They'll become open because they're not adaptable. Now, let's talk about some critical cow herd traits that we need to think about to improve our profitability. Calving ease and maternal calving ease, none of us need to pull calves. That's just the wrong thing to be doing. So calving ease is extremely important, and we need to continue to emphasize that. Fertility in cattle is extremely important. Fertility and longevity, two things I like to talk about kind of together because they are related. Fertility and longevity or sustainability of production. And then disposition. Disposition we haven't put enough emphasis on in the beef cattle industry. We don't need to have problems handling cattle. We don't have to. We can get around that. And then we got to be concerned about what the maintenance requirements are for the cows. Several factors influence how much feed it takes to maintain the cow. Not just how much it takes to feed her for production, but how much it takes to maintain her. And then we all need to be concerned about the value of calves. I didn't mention this in yesterday's presentation, but I'll bet many of you in this room know this. Do you know what the select choice spread was last week in the U.S.? Select choice spread last week was $27. That's the difference between a USDA choice carcass and a USDA select carcass per hundredweight, 27 per hundredweight. What's more dramatic, during the last year, there's been a tremendous change in consumer thought about quality beef. And I think that all came about because Sam's Wholesale began to sell prime beef about 8 months ago. So many people have now tasted prime beef that may not have ever eaten prime beef. In March, I bought prime steaks at Sam's, prime fillets for our little get-together for dinner after our bull sale. And those prime steaks in March cost me $13.99 a pound. I bought prime steaks 2 weeks ago, prime fillets at Sam's. Guess what those cost then? $13.99 in March, $25.99 just 2 weeks ago. Now I'm telling you something very important. There's a difference in eating quality of various kinds of beef, and there's a big difference in the price of that. Last week, that the prime premium choice spread, once again per hundredweight. The difference between premium choice, that'd be like certified Angus beef, and prime grade, you won't believe this unless you read it, $69 last week. $69. So there's a lot more to be thinking about the value of those calves than many of us think about. And that difference is going to stay greater as we go to the future, as more and more people want to eat a higher quality product, not just in this country, but around the world. Now, talking about calving ease just a moment, if we look at genetic evaluations, EPDs, we'll see values for calving ease direct. That's just how easily the calf is to be born. Calving ease maternal refers to the ability of the cow to have the calf, and that's very important too. And interestingly enough, I just had a call on Monday. A gentleman from Virginia who's gotten to be a friend of mine, he called and he'd had a couple of calves born that weighed a little over 100 pounds, so were two different bulls. And he said, I thought I was using calving ease bulls. And he said, my neighbor told me, though, that that the size of that calf is more under control of the cow than it is the bull. And he wanted to know the answer. Is the bull or the cow more responsible for the weight of the calf? Well, the cow contributes half the genes, right? And the bull contributes half the genes. But what does the cow contribute? She contributes the uterine environment for the growth of that fetus. So I told him that the cow is probably responsible for about 75% of that weight and the bull about 25%. So we oftentimes overlook that fact that that cow is really, really important in the size of that calf too, and her ability to have the calf. And there is a big difference among cows' ability to have calves, and that piece of genetic evaluation is calving ease maternal. Now someone might say, and this has gotten to be a little controversial in our industry, in Kentucky we're fortunate to have the tobacco funds that we can get some funding for to buy bulls and that kind of thing, and we're using calving ease for those breeds that have calving ease. That's the indicator of calving ease. Some people want to use birth weight. Which one is better, or which one should we use? Well, calving ease has birth weight as one of the predictors of calving ease. So it probably accounts for 75 to 80% of the differences in value, but we really should be looking at calving ease where it's available as compared to birth weight. Some few breeds don't have calving ease. In that case, we can still use birth weight as an indicator. Now, let's talk about fertility. Fertility is extremely important. Roger, you heard my son talking the other day. The first thing you heard him talk about is fertility, fertility, fertility. It is very important. How do we think about fertility? Age of puberty is really important. We want heifers to begin cycling young because that's indicative probably of how long they might stay in production and cycle and reproduce regularly in a lifetime. Many of the breeds have a heifer pregnancy value. I wish all of them did, but they don't all have that. Heifer pregnancy is indicative of what percentage of bulls' daughters will become pregnant in a breeding season, and the higher that is, the better. One thing that's so important to look at from a purebred and a commercial standpoint is the calving interval. We need to shorten that calving interval, and Jim will mention some more about that this afternoon. But the shorter we make that calving interval, the easier it is to manage the cattle, the better job we can do marketing the cattle, the better job we can do vaccinating and providing the right health program for them, all that kind of thing. And this short breeding season and short calving season is so important. And I put fescue up here because we in fescue country are a little different. I know some of you probably have heard some graziers from other parts of the country talk about calving in sync with nature. Some of you have heard that term, haven't you? Calving in sync with nature. Now, I have friends in Wyoming and Montana who have switched from January, February calving, where they calve in those barns with those thick insulated walls. Terribly tough job calving all those cows in a barn. They've switched to April, May calving, or even May, June. Is that the right thing for them? Now, that is calving in sync with nature, and I sure agree with that. But what if we try to calve in April and May in Kentucky on Kentucky 31 fescue, it won't work. It won't work. If we want to, and that's why we've switched a lot of calving in Kentucky to fall calving. Dr. Roy Burris, very good friend of mine and a great extension worker, and I'm sure a friend to many of you in this room. Roy and I often talk about this calving season thing. We think in the early 1970s in Kentucky and Tennessee that probably 85% of the calves were born in the spring, only about 15% in the fall. And we've seen a steady shift in that since about 1970 till now. We think it's probably like 55-45 now, 55 spring, 45 fall or something of that nature. And we continue to see more and more producers convert to a fall calving season. And the reason being, we got a much more favorable time with fescue and heat to get cows bred, so it's much easier to get cows pregnant if we do that. So fescue dictates a lot about when we should calve in reference to calving interval. Now let's shift and talk about this thing of longevity or stability just a moment. Economically, the most important trait in genetic evaluation, more than twice as important as the next closest trait. Dr. Mike McNeil, who was on the faculty or was a researcher at the USDA experiment station at Miles City, Montana, or Fort Keogh for many years, and he retired from there. He's the guy who developed the simulation models that allowed us to calculate the economic weights in most of the indexes that we now use in the beef cattle industry. And as he did that analysis, he's done that for Red Angus, Simmental, and Black Angus. And in all three of those breeds, he says that by far the most important economic trait is stability or the longevity of production of that cow. And in all three breeds, it's twice as important as the next closest trait. And importantly, the second most important trait is heifer pregnancy in his analysis. So it gets back to this fertility thing being so important to get cows bred, to get them to breed regularly, and to do that many years and produce a calf every year. Dr. McNeil talks about net present value, cows worth negative value. It costs us to put her in the herd or to buy her, whatever, and finally she'll break even, then she makes money, and he says it takes the third or fourth calf before she breaks even and starts to make us money. So that kind of further indicates how important it is that we have longevity of production in the herd. Now, I think we need to talk about user-friendly or convenience traits. Not any doubt about this. This slide I have here is my little grandboy when he was 4 years old. He loved the cows and he was out feeding cows. And we feel comfortable with him being around those cows at that size. And our cows need to be so that we can be around them and be comfortable with them. I was visiting with a fellow the other day who's a stickler on disposition, and he said if one of them just looks at me wrong, she gets on the trailer and goes to town. That might be a little extreme, but none of us need to have to fool with a crazy cow. I have a few scars on my body. I'm really lucky that I'm here today to talk to you because I could have been killed by a cow. And so we all need to be concerned about disposition, and we as seed stock producers need to be very concerned and place emphasis on it. No matter how good they are otherwise, if they're crazy or tend to be kind of high-strung, they don't need to stay around. Feet and legs are important too. We have kind of forgotten feet and legs in a couple of breeds. In Angus cattle and Red Angus cattle, we have problems with feet and legs, so we've got to work on that. American Angus Association now has a foot scoring scheme and an EPD for two feet and leg feet traits. Udder structure is extremely important. We don't need to let feet and legs or udders ever be a reason for culling cows, is our approach. They don't need to be culled because they got bad feet and legs or got bad udders, and we can keep that from happening by selection. You can do that also in the commercial herd as well. Disposition, of course, relates to how easy it is to handle cattle, and I'm not bragging about this. It's just the way we all ought to operate. In the 6 herds that I take care of, I move all those cows by myself, and I can bring every one of those cows into our working area by myself. And I couldn't do that if those cows weren't pretty good disposition. So we're around them a lot, and I work them a lot, so they are that way. But if they act up on us, they won't stay around. Disposition is also, it's just, as I mentioned earlier, it's very important from a human safety standpoint. It relates to growth rate in the stock rearing and feeding stage, and it certainly relates to carcass quality. A large reason for the dark cutting carcasses, and by the way, a dark cutting carcass, instead of getting that premium we talked about a while ago, a dark cutting carcass probably losing $40 a hundred last week. So we don't need dark cutting carcasses, and the largest contributor to dark cutting carcasses probably is the disposition of the cattle. Feet and legs. Now you're going to kind of laugh when this is not a cow up here, is it? My wife and I were at Glacier National Park and stayed in the lodge there, and I really like this slide. And I probably should be using cow slides, but I saw this mountain goat in a glass cage there. And this mountain goat, you know, mountain goats got to have good feet to thrive and move about in those mountains. So it was just interesting to me to look at some of the characteristics of the feet of this mountain goat. Things that are important are the size of the toes and the way the toes are shaped. And one of the problems and one of the scores we do for those Angus cattle and that EPD, there's too much space between those toes. And I mentioned Angus and Red Angus, probably not much difference as far as breed is concerned, those two. Simmental are much better. I can't tell you exactly why they are inherently better, but Simmental doesn't have near as much foot problem as Angus and Red Angus do. Udders. Now, these are two of our cows. And we don't have to have udders quite as good as these, but that udder needs to have good support. Those teats need to be above the hocks. Teats need to be plenty small so the calf can get his mouth on them when he's first born. So udder structure is heritable, and if we select for good udders, and now I'm not going to be critical because I asked you this question, but when I ask you this, how many of you looked at the bull looked at the bull's mother before you bought the last bull? Or how many of you asked the breeder what the mother's udder was like before you bought the last bull? Well, if you don't investigate, it might not be very good. So we do need to pay attention to udder structure. Talk about frame size and mature weight quickly here. One of the big things we need to do to make cows thrive in a pasture setting and to be able to run more cows in a pasture setting is be careful with mature size. We've let mature size slip up pretty high. 1975, we're at about 1047. 2005, 1369. We've increased cow weight in that period of time over 300 pounds. That's a big take home. Good friend of mine, Johnny Rogers, is at North Carolina State University, and they have an amazing grazing program. They have a group of producers on a program there at North Carolina. And one of the requirements in this advanced program they require them to weigh the cows and weigh the calves to see what percent of the cow weight the calf is. And the average cow weight in that group of producers in North Carolina is 1398. Probably not much different than it would be if we weighed your cows. Now, you may not think they're that big, but they're bigger than we generally think they are. And Johnny says that in North Carolina, there are more of those cows over 1,600 than under 1,200. So we have simply let our cows get bigger than they need to be. And an important question here, and I'll give you a couple of research studies. The question should be, can farmers or ranchers be more profitable with larger small cows? Dr. Chris Ringwald at North Dakota State compared 1,100-pound cows and 1,400-pound cows, herds running together. And he found very clearly that it's better to have 1,100-pound cows. 20 to 30% more pounds of calf produced per acre. We should be thinking about pounds per acre rather than pounds per cow. And he produced 20 to 30% more pounds per acre with 1,100-pound cows than with 1,400-pound cows. In other words, he could run 130 1,100-pound cows on the same resources as would be required for 100 1,400-pound cows. 5 for 4. 5 for 4. Dr. Jason Roundtree at Michigan State University was given a task a few years ago to, and by the way, Jim Garish has worked with him with his pastures up there in these 2 experiment stations in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. In 2009, when Dr. Roundtree started this project, his cows weighed 1,500. 2015, they weighed 1,200. And just to show you the difference, what can happen, his cow days per acre increased from 74 to 110 during that 6-year period. That's a big change, and a lot of that due to differences in cow size. Of course, part of it probably also due to improvement in pasture rotation as well. One thing that Roundtree concluded, and that's really interesting to look at, Roundtree said that smaller cows convert low-quality forages more efficiently than larger cows. We believe that to be true. Don't have really good data that I can show you to say for sure it's true, but we believe that to be the situation. I would sure agree with him. Dr. Roundtree thinks the sweet spot for cow weight is in his environment is about 1,200 pounds. That's the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. But that's comparable to about 1,100 in Kentucky. There'd be 100 pounds different just due to environment between these 2 areas, I believe. Now, how much milk? We'll hit this quickly. Colostrum for the newborn calf is important. Ample colostrum supply. Then enough milk to provide calf with adequate nutrition until the rumen develops and the calf begins to graze or consume roughage. And then milk supplies some important supplemental nutrients after that calf is actually grazing. But many of our cows simply have too much milk. Results of too much milk, we get increased nutrient requirements during lactation, but also during the dry period, because cows that have the genetics for more milk production potential have larger visceral organs, particularly larger livers, lungs, spleens, kidneys, that kind of thing. And therefore, they take more nutrients when the cow's dry as well as when she's in lactation. Very important. Now, work done at the University of Nebraska a few years ago, they determined how much a pound of milk was worth in low-producing cows, medium, and high-producing cows. And all I want to tell you here is that conversion of milk to growth in high-producing cows is not good. 11.8 pounds of milk, 15.2, 52.6 in high-producing cows. So if a cow produces lots of milk, it takes a lot more of it to give an extra pound on the calf than if she's a low-producing cow. Oklahoma State study, very good. They found that cows with high milk production potential actually produce less milk than cows with average milk production potential as forage quality declined during the summer. So actually cows that have this genetic potential for high milk production, they've got to be fed to have that or they won't produce that milk. And this shows differences in cow counts, and I'm not going into this greatly except to just show you quickly. A 1,200-pound cow producing 20 pounds, and we think the U.S. average is somewhere around 17 or 18. If we could run 100 cows like that, if we had a third more milk, 93 cows. If we had just 10 pounds of milk, 108 cows. So amount of milk, size are the 2 factors that determine how many cows we can run per acre. Conformation or body shape, just a real quick slide on this. Weight-height relationship is critical. In general, more pounds per unit of height is desirable. In other words, we don't want tall, narrow cows. We'd like to have as much weight per unit of height as possible. Those will be cattle will be more efficient in a forage setting. And here's an example. This extra spring of rib, we call it, right here, extra spring of the rib cage and center body width is desirable. That's what we need the cow to look like. Just happened to be a cow. I saw one of ours out in the field, took a shot. And so we really like that big barrel on those cows. They'll generally be the easier fleshing cows. The cows that will maintain condition, rebreed much better than those cows that are shaped differently. Now, a little quickie on one thing that's so important in commercial cattle production. the first commandment of commercial beef cattle breeding should be to crossbreed. The free lunch, still yet in the beef cattle industry, is hybrid vigor. And we've overlooked it for too long. Just to try to make a calf be black, we've overlooked it. So many cows in this state are 5 or 6 generations of Angus on Angus on Angus on Angus. Do I like Angus cows? Absolutely. Angus breed's done more to select to improve marbling, decrease birth weight, increase growth, done more than any other breed in those 3 areas. So Angus have done wonderful things. They've made them pretty big and pretty heavy milking too now. They've done very well at that as well. But the fact is, we need to crossbreed to make the most profit. And why are we so certain is because we have reams of research data, plenty of evidence to show the economic advantages for crossbreeding. And it's so powerful because we get hybrid vigor. That's the improvement in the crossbred as compared to the 2 parent breeds. But we can also use breed complementarity. If we have a breed that doesn't have as much muscle to cross with another breed that normally has more muscle, or like crossing an Angus or Red Angus with a Charolais, or a Red Angus Hereford cross, black baldy cow with a Charolais to improve growth rate, also to improve carcass yield. So we do breed complementarity, and we can do that with crossing, which we can't do necessarily with purebreds. These 2 fellows say, Schaefer and Lipsy say, when it comes to fertility and longevity, back to those 2 important traits, crossbreeding is the trump card. It is. We can improve those traits more by crossbreeding than we can by selection. So really important to crossbreed to improve fertility and longevity. So maternal heterosis is not glamorous, but it's huge. That's the hybrid vigor in the cow. Gregory, USDA Meat Animal Research Center, Clay Center, Nebraska, and they've done tremendous work at Clay Center. 20% more calf wean per cow exposed. Annual, 20% more calf wean per cow exposed. Still USDA Meat Animal Research Center, Conduct, 1992, 1.3 years increased cow longevity, thus 30% more pounds of calf weaned over the lifetime of the cow. 30% more pounds of calf weaned if the cow's a crossbred versus a purebred cow. And 1 more calf for 600 pounds of calf weaned for a crossbred cow. Another way to look at it. Now, to summarize what I've said to you this morning, I believe strongly that hair shedding in the early spring is the best indicator of adaptability to this environment and the forages we have in Kentucky, particularly for Kentucky 31 fescue. And efficient cows that provide the opportunity for optimizing profitability, and that's what we should be thinking about, should excel for calving ease, fertility, longevity, disposition. It's all right if they still grow if they don't get too big, and then we need to keep carcass value in mind while requiring minimal nutrients for body maintenance. And the last one here is so important, hybrid vigor can be a major driver of profitability for cow-calf producers. I'll just show you this slide because I'm very proud of this. This is my son, daughter-in-law, and grandson as they were receiving the award as the 2017 Red Angus Breeder of the Year for the U.S. And this is one of our cooperators from North Carolina, that Johnny Rogers fellow I mentioned a little while ago. He's now president of the Red Angus Association. And the 3 of us work together. I'm just thankful to be able to work with my family in an operation, do the things I taught for 40 years, but get to practice it every day. This is my son and grandson, and he probably knows the cows better than anybody in the family. It's been a pleasure for me to be with you today, and I did on this slide just show you where we're located, right in the middle of the state, right here. 3 counties in Kentucky and 1 county in Tennessee where we operate.
All right. Let's hold our questions. We need to get to break and visit with our sponsors, but Gordon, you'll be here to answer questions on break?
Yeah.
Let's give Gordon a big hand.